Welcome to Work from the Inside Out, a podcast that highlights real-life stories, practical strategies, and best practices for transitioning your career from unhappiness and dissatisfaction to fulfillment, meaning, and joy. Now here is your host, career and executive coach, Tammy Guler-Loeb.
Hey, everybody. I am so delighted to introduce you today to my guest, Lisa Linfield. Lisa is a personal finance expert, keynote speaker, course creator, and host of her podcast, Working Women's Wealth. Lisa is a board-certified financial planner, is the CEO of a wealth and investment management business, Southern Pride Wealth. She has 2 honors degrees, one in financial planning, and has studied at Oxford, Insead, and London Business School. She has over 20 years of financial services experience in the UK and South Africa. She's been featured in Forbes, Thrive Global, Contemporary Business, Investing for Life, and other podcasts. Lisa's goal is to teach 1 million women about money, how to make money, invest it, and protect it. To that end, she has established her podcast, which alternates weekly between featuring women who've achieved personally and professionally and solo teaching to engage, equip, and empower her listeners. Please join me in welcoming Lisa Linfield. Hey, Lisa.
Hey, how are you?
Oh, doing great. So happy to have you here. And so, Lisa, as you know, this is a podcast about transitions and career professional transitions. And I know that you have made many transitions of your own, that you bring a lot of experience and depth to the work that you're doing today. And we just introduced you in terms of what you're doing today. But I know that there's a lot of things that you did even earlier in your career that our listeners don't know about. So I'd love for you to kind of take us back a few years and tell us about your earlier years and earlier education and how that informed where you are today.
So my first honors degree is that I'm a physical therapist. And so I went to med school. I kind of worked out very quickly that I wasn't going to be a doctor, that this wasn't quite my thing. But from a financial perspective, I had a scholarship. And so I went down the road of becoming a physical therapist at a time in South African's history where it was the early 90s. Nelson Mandela had just been released. And we had an enormous power struggle within our country. And as a 19, 20-year-old youngster, I was basically put in the middle of a war zone in our hospitals. And I look back on it now, and it was an unbelievably traumatic time for me. So not only was I on the wrong path, well, not on my path, on a path that was, when you go to school and you are academic and you achieve a lot, and often as a good little girl, you're told go into medicine because that's what all, good little girls that are helping other people and clever do is you go into medicine. And so I was on the wrong track, having this experience that was deeply traumatizing to see, the violence that can happen when there is a power struggle and things like that. So I practiced physical therapy for a year after I graduated and had one of those crucial moments in life that is a make or break. So I guess, deep in my heart, I knew I had made the wrong decision, but I had invested so many days and so many nights in getting this enormous, degree under my belt and practicing. And I got accepted for the Sports Science Institute in South Africa. And this was like the ultimate pinnacle of what I could be. At that point, I had transitioned out of hospital work and into sports physical therapy. And I got this amazing offer to work with our top sports professor. But I live in Johannesburg, and it was based in Cape Town. And I had to make a massive country move, town move. And I knew in my soul I would be back in 2 years' time in the exact same position, whereby, as wonderful as it wasn't what I was born to do.
So I'm curious. So it sounds like in those young early years, there were several points where there was some underlying voice within you that kept saying, I don't really want to be doing this. I don't really want to be doing this. And part of it may have been compelled by being in and amongst a very traumatic and tumultuous period of time in South Africa.
So I think
But
it's
it
a
was
combination
something else too.
I think it's a combination of both.
Yeah.
My dad has a fantastic expression, which is you've got to know the difference between good reasons and real reasons why you do something. If I was deeply honest, I would say that the real reason I went to med school, all good little girls go and be doctors, because then you can also go and have a really nice life, with your children, your 2.5 kids and the golden retriever.
Right.
I think I had created in myself, the story that this is what the world out there kind of thought was the best thing for me.
Yeah.
Not what I thought was the best thing for me. And I always, when I coach young people on this decision, I always say to them, be very clear as to why you're choosing a path. You see, the wonderful thing about America is you do an undergraduate and then you go to med school, essentially. In South Africa, you do the full 7 to 9 years because we have compulsory community service in South Africa. You do that full period of time straight from out of school. So you go straight into medical school. You know, it's kind of how we have to make that decision very early.
And I will say, though, that there's a lot of pressure on kids here in the U.S., even in undergrad. If they're aiming for med school, they have to be pounding the pavement as undergrads to prepare for that. And I think there's a parallel, though, here, regardless of where you are, that there's a pressure on kids that at 18, somehow you're supposed to magically know. Most kids, I think, don't know. I think some do, but many don't. That there's the voice of kind of authority or trusted adults or other people in your life who are telling you, here's the pathway to a good life. And we often listen to that. And then there's that other, more, I would call it more organic voice, or that whisper that's saying, I hear that, but there's something else tugging at me. We often, especially when we're younger, we don't always listen to that because we think there are other people who know what's better based on their experience. And so we usually find our way to that other voice later on.
Absolutely. And Tammy, it's such an interesting thing because, so I'm writing a book at the moment, and effectively I'm writing a book on these transitions that I've been through and this thinking that I'm having. And this morning, I was reflecting so deeply on this because, when you look back and you're, kind of in your 20s and you sit there and you go, all these people kind of give you this view of what the right thing to do and right thing is and isn't, and we look at it with, I guess a bit of judgment, as the recipient of it. And now that I'm a parent, it's such an interesting thing because whether it's your parents, whether it's your teachers, whether it's whatever, we all give advice on our own lens. They each had their own struggles, So if I've really struggled being a corporate working person, I might advise you to do a job or a career where it does allow you the flexibility that you could pick up your kids from school, which if I have my own medical practice, I can say, okay, I'm not going to book between 2 and 3 so I can pick up the kids from school. I went from physio into banking and I've never gone back there. Yet the skill set I learned at medical school is unparalleled in terms of problem resolution. Right. So when you are taught as an accountant or as a banker to solve things. It's you're taught one formula.
Right.
When you work with human beings as your primary thing, which you do at med school, you're taught to start diagnosing that patient when they walk in the door. So I think that I have got unbelievable problem-solving skills.
Yeah.
That are not common in the workplace, because most of the people that are in the workplace in the banking industry that I went into had finance-based degrees.
And yet, what I think you're pointing out something critically important, and that is that even though you decided it wasn't where you wanted to stay, there was, vitally critical, important skills that you gained from that took you to the next place. And that it doesn't mean that just because you started somewhere that made it a mistake or that it was all wrong. It wasn't all wrong. It did lead you to the next thing. And what would it have looked like if you had listened to that voice earlier on? What would you have done? We don't know. Sometimes we have to experience that uncomfortableness or that discomfort in order to find what we do like.
Absolutely. And I also think, I went, 6 of us girls went on a trip to Italy. And there was an expression that we had there, maybe just to ease our own conscience, which is that there's no wrong turn in Italy, because you can imagine 6 women trying to get around Italy on the wrong side of the road or the opposite side of the road in a car. I mean, it was a cacophony of noise.
I love that.
There is no wrong turn in Italy. And I kind of have often thought that about life. There is no wrong turn in life. But at the time, that thought of letting down your family, letting down yourself, am I throwing away this unbelievable, career?
Right.
All the reasons why I went into physio played in my head.
Yeah.
So, and when you take that step, I always say that it's that almost, they put it in slow motion in a movie. It's that gap, that time of actually taking that first step takes so much more bravery and so much more energy and so much more courage than any other step afterwards.
Yes.
They always, I always think of the book that Stephen Covey wrote on the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And he talked about that the rocket ship takes the most energy just to get out of the Earth's atmosphere, and then the rest of it goes. And I look, what people always forget when they look at other people's stories is that, in the book of my story, it'll be, and then she left physio and went into banking and what, and it'll pass over as a sentence. I went to the UK and worked in the UK. I did mergers and acquisitions. I did all these other things. None of them were as hard as that first transition as a youngster, where you felt like you were going against what society had said was the right thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
And I've made massive decisions since then, and lots of different transitions. I think the hardest next one has been my most recent one, which is stepping off the corporate ladder and onto my own thing. And again, we always pass those over as one sentence. These transitions become one sentence moments of when we left the one and come to the next. And then they pass through that and focus on, how did you upskill yourself? How did you do this? How did you do that?
Right.
But in actual fact, all of those, the knowledge component is far easier to catch up. It's that space where everything slows down and you actually have to commit yourself and not go back. That's the hardest part.
Yeah. And what you're looking at here is there's all the questions that people might have, like, how did you do this? How did you do this? And the question I want to know is, I want to know how, but I also want to know why. So, for example, you went from physio to banking. Why? What happened there?
So I think again, it comes down to that gut. I think I always knew that I was born for business. I grew up in a business-oriented family where discussion of the business was, a day-to-day, a supper time conversation. And I had actually, before I had looked at med school, I had gone to look at business schools.
Oh, okay.
And so I had always been kind of inclined in that way. I grew up with a number of either family members or friends, close friends, who were CEOs of major businesses and global companies. And so it was very accessible to me that I could become a CEO of a major corporation. Why banking? Because I had a number of my parents' friends were in banking. And so it was something I was exposed to. What was interesting in that decision, which I think probably the most about in the kind of not regret, but interesting points, was that I had got down to 2 interviews. One was in an investment asset management company, and one was in digital banking. And the guidance I was given by a family friend was stop in the modern digital world. Now, this was about 99. In the modern digital world, this was before mobile or anything modern digital that we know. His forecast was that stockbrokers and asset managers will become redundant. It'll be done by a computer. So therefore, you need to learn digital.
So were you, did you go right from physio into banking, or had you gone to school for business? Or
On Friday, I was a physio. On Monday, I was a banker. I went in there as naive as a youngster can go in there, and kind of decided I was going to work myself and prove myself. And fortunately, as a brand new physio, I earned not much. And as a brand new banker, I earned not much. And so I hadn't got to a stage where I was giving up anything financially.
Right.
I guess it was ego that I gave up, because I didn't have any of the degrees they had. But it was just, I just did it. You
were eager to really enter a new world and try something different.
Absolutely. And there fortunately wasn't a recipe. And I think that's where I did get lucky, is that when you go into something mainstream that has a set recipe and rhythm and all that stuff, then people can peg you that there's someone that knows more or knows less than you. When it's something completely greenfield, the wonderful thing about that is it does get down to those, like whenever I coach people on transitions and they say, oh, but I know nothing. And I'm like, okay, let's work with that. Do you know nothing? No, you have problem solving skills. You have interpersonal skills. You have leadership skills. And when you come down to greenfield kind of things, which is about like our modern economy at the moment, there is no right or wrong way. It just requires you to go back to problem solving, those basic skills.
And yet, in today's world, that transition you made from physio to banking, you couldn't have done it quite that way today that you did it all those years ago.
Well, except that there are all these. So if you think about it, there never used to be a position called social media marketing, because our phones didn't. I mean, that's a brand. If you look at anything to do with an app, that's only happened in the last 5 years.
Yeah.
So it's that kind of thing of transitioning to something completely new. Yeah. So I don't know. I think it comes down to an attitude. I think it comes down to how you approach this thing. Is the sacrifice of being in the wrong thing worth more than the uncomfortableness of starting something new?
No, I think from the point of view of being the candidate, I can understand somebody wanting to make that switch. I'm thinking from the employer point of view, they would probably find somebody who has a degree that has a closer relationship to the industry.
So maybe, but I think that's where wanting to start at the bottom. They didn't have being okay to work yourself up.
Right. There wasn't anybody who would even have a degree that would even resemble that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And also just because I was prepared to work hard.
Right.
And that was what they knew.
I know that you've done a few other things during that time. I know you took a sabbatical in the middle.
I then went to the UK, and I worked in the UK, which was a major transition for me, because the great, wonderful thing in hindsight about going to a different country is that people can't peg you. They don't know what your university was, whether it was good, bad, or indifferent. They don't know what background you came from, whether your family was good, bad, or indifferent. You have a completely different accent. So they can't say, well, you're from the north or the south or the whoever, east or west. And it was such an amazing time. I always say to young people, the best place to find that voice in your tummy is when you can drown out the noise of all of the things that your context tells you. So I rock up in this new country. I have no parental influences. I have no friends that have known me forever. I have nothing. I have me. I have some shoes that can get me to interviews, and I go and I pound those pavements. And I literally went into management consulting. So I'd done this internet banking thing, and I went and I interviewed at Price Waterhouse and Deloitte and all the management consulting, because I had this one skill, which was I was one of the 3 people in the world who had launched a mobile bank. It was so exciting and so much fun. And what happened there was that I found me outside the constraints of what the world told me I should be. I could reinvent myself to be anybody, because nobody could peg me anywhere, and you say I'm from South Africa, and, people say, so not the British, because obviously we were a British colony, but, the other foreigners would go, oh my goodness, where is that? And I would go, I could be anywhere in Africa, Oh, I've got a friend in Egypt. Oh, really? Egypt and South Africa, they're right next door to each other. I'm sure I'll know your friend.
No.
And no, I promise you. So anyway, it was a wonderful experience. And then I met my husband, and our first date was on the 23rd of March. And by April, I knew that I was going to marry this man. I don't know why. I just, again, this thing in my tummy. And I had one unfulfilled dream. And that was that I wanted to go and study in Oxford. And my grandfather had been to Oxford. And I knew that if I got married, I could never be selfish enough to take that money and spend it on myself. So I decided there and then, 1 month after meeting this man, that I was going to go, and I took a sabbatical and I went to Oxford. And I decided that I would do nothing that one would do for a career, because a company can sponsor you to go and study a business degree or a finance degree or whatever. And if I was going to self-sponsor, I would do something that I was interested in. So I went and studied theology. And all the reasons I went, I think partly because I grieved not having the university experience that other people had, where they had fun and parties and all that kind of stuff. We were at hospital for 4 hours in the morning, and then we'd go to 4 hours of lecture, and then you'd do 4 hours of work kind of stuff. I think I went to go and relive all of that. And I always had the best year for none of those reasons. You cannot explain the experience of those, what you would call Ivy League universities, where you're surrounded by the most unbelievable brains, where it's literally just that life experience. And I'd always gone to it not for the study, but for the life experience. And the humbleness of being in these buildings that had 800, 900, 1,000 years of history in them. And it was just the most wonderful thing. But transitioning back into the workplace was the shock of my life after that. And now I had to pound the pavements and explain why I just spent a year studying theology. Which does also, again, it doesn't quite fit in the box of kind of, when you're a physical therapist. So now if you're talking education in a job interview, you're a physical therapist with a postgrad in theology. So when I have my amusing moments, I always say, yes, I can massage the numbers and pray like mad. That's my, contribution to the exec team. I can, so it was a very difficult transition. And also, you were so disconnected from the real world. The academic life is wonderful, but it's quite disconnected from the real world. So it felt like quite a cultural shock going back into business, but also you were out of practice. And I found a job very easy. I got a job for Citigroup and did amazing things with them. But then I got married, and my husband got transferred to South Africa, not me. The Brit got transferred to South Africa, and the South African stayed in England for the beginning of the thing. And it forced us to make a transition. So sometimes you choose transitions in life, and other times life chooses its transitions for you. And so my husband got a job in South Africa because I knew at some stage I wanted to come back to South Africa to have my kids here. It's a lovely life. It's an amazingly wonderful life. And so I came back and kind of continued into the banking and corporate space again, because I guess that's what I knew at a time where life was transitioning, marriage, children, new children, etc. It was great to be able to keep my corporate side as stable as possible whilst life was throwing you a million changes, in terms of having kids and all of that. And then a really difficult thing happened, which was that we had struggled to have kids, and had gone through a lot of fertility treatment. And then I fell pregnant with twins and was extremely ill and had to give up my job again. Because at that stage, I was running a 3 billion rand business, and it couldn't operate without me being there full time. I had 5 months in bed before I had my twins, and then 5 months of maternity leave afterwards. And so I gave up my job, but I came back and there was no job. So whilst I was employed, I physically still had an employment contract because I'd been on sick leave and maternity leave. There was no job. And it was something so interesting because one is kind of, our whole life we're taught that if you work hard and you do well, you will always succeed. It's kind of, you're taught that through your grades at school, then you're taught that through your grades at university, and you kind of taught that through a successful corporate career. And your bosses keep telling you how wonderful you are, and your teachers told you how wonderful you are, and your sense of self is very external. And now you come back, and at a senior level, the problem with the pyramid is that there's less and less roles at a senior level. So you vacated a role and you've come back and there are no seats free. And it was such a difficult thing. I left with a secretary, a corner office, and a team. And I came back with a hot desk, no job, and almost no sense of identity. And I'd just gone through the shift of having twins. And it was a transition that truly lasted 7 years. And that transition was questioning this whole philosophy of, if you work hard, you will do well. If you work hard and you do well, and the circumstances at the time have an open spot for you, you will do well. Otherwise, you might just find yourself sitting in a hot desk in the middle of the technical support team.
Right.
And then when you look at this whole transition, you then sit there and go, okay, there was leadership changes, there was restructures, and I guess I got lost in the woodwork through that whole time. And now there's nobody telling you what a wonderful person you are and how great and talented, all that stuff. And it actually started the transition, which led me to where I was now, which was this big question of, society tells you that we progress, and to progress in a corporate, you go up a food chain to get to become the CEO.
Right.
And so that was what I had always thought my pathway was, to be CEO of a global corporation. Whether or not I had the talent or not, I probably didn't, but that was my ambition, was to be CEO of a big corporation. What I started questioning is that what I want?
Exactly.
And I started to sit there and go, actually, I don't know if that is what I want. And I look up at what every stage brought for it, and I didn't enjoy it more. There were parts I enjoyed more. There were parts I loved. My career did get back on track, and I loved being part of a team, and I loved that kind of stuff. But I then went for a CEO interview, and in that interview came up the same question of being a physio with a master's in theology. And it was so difficult for me because I'm sitting there going, I have 19, 20 years of experience in financial services, and I'm now being asked, do I have a bachelor's degree? Why I don't have a bachelor's degree in finance? And the point of the interviewer was around, well, how do you face the markets? How do you say, okay, here's Lisa. She's the CEO of a financial services company. Oh, and she can massage the numbers and pray like mad. It's that kind of thing of so in actual fact, I took myself off to get a degree. And that degree was in an honors in financial planning. And I started to fall in love with this degree because at the end of every lesson, the knowledge was so useful that I would phone a friend who was going through a divorce. I'd say, hey, this is what you need to do. And then I would phone a friend when we learned about wills and saying, you have got minor children. If you do not put a will in place, by the end of this week, I will hound you every day until, these are my godchildren or whatever it is. Then the next one I would phone up and I would say, did you know that? And every single week, this feeling of being able to use my knowledge to help a human to fundamentally change their path. I started to fall in love with it. And for the first time, I actually knew what it was like to have both passion and purpose in the work that I do. And for me, the difference in that definition is when I was working in corporates, I had lots of passion. I enjoyed what I did. I was good at it. It worked, but I never helped another human. And I could, for the first time, see myself being able to have my own business, to being able to do this full time, to help people full time. And this thing started to grow and grow and grow inside of me. And I then led a strategy session where I got them to fill out 18 questions on, the title of the talk was, why everybody needs a financial advisor. And I'm still employed in my company and all of this stuff, but we worked with financial advisors. So I did this thing. And at the end, it must have been over 300 people. And then at the end, I picked up these forms of people had left them and gone home. And we were in a financial services firm, and the average that people had was 5 out of the 18 things, between 1 and 5 out of the 18 things that you needed. And I thought to myself, if people in this industry have so little sorted, what else is happening out there? And I remember I worked for the most phenomenal boss, the most amazing human being. And I said to him, I'm terribly sorry, but I'm giving you 6 months notice. I'm going to start this transition, through that. And I started that transition took 1.5 years. So I was only in my first out of 2 years of study. And I remember people saying to me, why did you need to go and get the honors degree? So let's say apart from the CEO interview and all those other things, when you do a transition later on in life, you don't have the guts of a youngster. You don't have that kind of almost, I can slay the world and do all of that kind of stuff. In order to be good at something, you need 3 things. You need attitude, you need experience, or you need knowledge, or all 3 of them. So when I did the first transition, I had attitude and guts. I had no knowledge and no experience. When I made this major transition, I believe that for me personally, I needed the degree. Yes, I could have stayed for years building myself up with experience and knowledge if I'd gone into a different company. But I in that case, I really didn't fit the mold, to have a person who had come from senior level to go back to being the bottom of the food chain. For me, it just felt like I needed to get that degree. So that was part of my transition. And the knowledge was fantastic. I remember 2 key moments in that gap of taking the step. The first one was when I transitioned from full-time into half days, so being a consultant. And effectively, I gave up my leadership positions and my teams and all of that kind of stuff, and I became a consultant. I remember sitting in our HR director's office, and she had this pack of cards on her table, and I said, what are those? And she said, it's tarot cards for tarot cards for HR. And I was like, all righty then. And she said, no, and she packed up. She said, no, they are coaching questions. Shuffle the pack and pick. And the 3 questions I picked, the one that stood out is, what will you think about this decision in 10 years' time? And I knew the answer would be, I wish I had found this earlier. A year later, when I'd done my half-day thing, and now I was stepping out of corporate forever and going that step where time slows down, I went to hand in my computer and my pass and all those things that you do, and the pack of cards was on her desk, and I shuffled them and I pulled out one card. And that one card, again, was the 52 coaching questions. I pull out the exact same card, which was, what will you think about this decision in 10 years' time? It is so easy to stay in the safety of what you know, to stay in the safety of what you're good at, to stay in the safety of your peers and colleagues, and actually a system that you can work and play and get yourself to the top. it's that moment of time where you step, where you hand in that security pass, you hand in all of that kind of stuff, and there is no turning back. And I knew when I looked at that card, the answer was, I wish I had have done it sooner. And so I took that step and I walked out and I started my own business. But what that question forced me to think was, I cannot delay this decision any longer. Otherwise, I would regret it.
Yes.
I can't find a million excuses as to why I should stay with the big salary, why I should stay in the corporate thing. I knew in my heart that this was the journey I needed to take. And I knew that if I didn't take that step then, if I found a reason to stay, and I could have stayed, that it would then turn into regret. There was not a minute sooner. I had to finish the degree. I had to get certified. I had to go through the processes. But the skills, everything I learned through those 20 years before, every single thing I learned was, I think, important.
Mm-hmm.
I said to him, you know what the thing is? I believe I will work for the next 40 years. I believe I will work till I'm 80 because I love to work. I've spent 20 years in one thing. I have found what I believe I was born to do. And so why wouldn't I start right back at the bottom, work my way up again through my career, through my kind of new competency set? Because when you are so lucky as to find something that can not only use your skill set, something that you're passionate about, but also something that can serve other people, like that is gold. I mean, that gives itself an energy that I've never experienced before.
Yeah.
But that transition has been the hardest personal transition. Because if at the top of my corporate career, I was a 9 out of 10 in confidence, I think I'm now a 4 out of 10. Because my confidence was the pack of cards in corporate, where it was built by what the performance reviews were, by your colleagues, by your peers. When you work for yourself, it all has to come from inside you. And it was a skill set I had never learned. Was I think I always worked for someone else to tell me that it was good. And it's been the most important journey of finding me as a human being, having to trust my gut because there is nobody else to answer. So I can't rely on the voices out there. I actually have to come back to, do I think it's right or wrong? What do I think the strategy is? There's nobody else to blame. When things go wrong, it's all me. That's, did it wrong. When things go right, it's all me, but there's only me and my pot plant to cheer me on, So it's been the most amazing transition. But this one is a transition of self, of who is Lisa? What does she think?
Yeah. So what does it look like today, Lisa? What is your business looking like today? And I love the way you phased out of your job and didn't just, I think sometimes people assume that to go from one thing to the next, that people just jump. And I don't think it usually happens that way. I think there's usually some kind of progression. So I like the way you described how that happened. But I'm curious, tell us a little bit about what you're offering today and what our listeners can how they can learn more about what you're doing.
A first comment on the transition is you put yourself under a lot of stress financially. If you transition, just jump. It forces you to have to get revenue quickly. What that does is that it makes you sometimes make the wrong decisions, is to take business because you can get money rather than to take business because you think it's right. So I always say one of the biggest ways to relieve the stress is to transition out of it. So full day, half day, etc. Having said that, it obviously has its own challenges. So where I am now is that I have my my wealth management business, which I guess also, is for my head. It's a fantastic business. It's one-on-one and it's for my head. My passion is to teach 1 million women about money.
Right.
And that passion has, having set a big goal, it forced me to say, okay, well, if I can't teach them one-on-one, how am I going to do it?
Yeah,
And so I
because a
started this
million, that'd be hard to do one-on-one.
one-on-one, absolutely. And I started this podcast not knowing anything and suffered the most unbelievable imposter syndrome, because who was I to have a podcast? It was unbelievable. But it has been the most precious journey of meeting amazing humans. I like interviewing you on my show, and amazing humans and just phenomenal growth. That for me, that has been something that I've loved, is the opportunity to teach people. So that for me is one of my primary vehicles. And then I've started to build courses to teach people about money. And I teach my philanthropies. I teach underprivileged women about money. And so what does it look like for me now? It looks like a journey of discovering amazing different ways to teach people about money. But I'm going to just take it each day at a time.
So how can people learn more about what you're doing, or if they would want to possibly engage your services? Where can they find you?
Oh, that's so sweet. I have a website called workingwomenswealth.com, and that would probably be the best way to get to me. Yeah, it's got a number of different resources. It's got videos, downloads, things like that people could learn about.
And that's where they can find your podcast as well, right?
And that's where they can find my podcast, or on any iTunes, Stitcher, any place that has a podcast is also where you can find me.
And you are a fabulous interviewer too, by the way. I can attest to that. So this has been great. Lisa, you really exemplify work from the inside out, I have to say. I'm just thrilled to have had you here today.
Thank you.
And thank you for crossing all the time zones to be here today from South Africa. I also just love hearing you talk. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. It's been such a fun time again, as always.
I hope you enjoyed my interview with Lisa Linfield. It was so interesting to speak with her and learn about her personal and professional journey. What is your key takeaway from her interview? Is there something you'll put into action this week that you'll benefit from? Share what resonated with you in the show notes at workfromtheinsideout.com. Look for episode 051. That's also where you'll find all the links and resources from today's podcast. If you were inspired by this episode with Lisa, please share it with your friends and colleagues. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss next week's show. Remember, subscribing is always free. Are you enjoying the podcast? I'd love to read your review on Apple Podcasts. It's easy to find my page at tammygoulerloeb.com/Apple. Thanks so much for listening. And remember, it's never too late or too impossible to increase your sense of fulfillment and satisfaction in your work and other meaningful activities. Let me know how it's going for you. And who knows, maybe you'll be my next interview on this podcast. Bye for now.
Thank you for listening to the Work from the Inside Out podcast. For more information, you can find us at www.workfromtheinsideout.com.